Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here with us today. Because today, well, we're going to completely change the way you look at the food sitting on your plate. When most people think about agriculture, they just picture dirt, a handful of seeds, and maybe a few farm animals. But we are going way past that today. We're going to explore agriculture not just as some simple chore, but as this fascinating, globally interconnected machine. From the microscopic chemistry of the soil all the way to massive satellite-guided combines roaming the plains, the global farm is literally the system that keeps humanity alive. All right, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll dig into the roots of agriculture. Then, the farm system itself. Third, how the world farms. Fourth, the crops that feed us. And finally, the future of farming. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The roots of agriculture, from plant to product. Okay, before we start zooming out to massive global systems, let's ground this whole thing in a really relatable, everyday human story just to see where it all begins. Picture 3 kids, Gurpreet, Madho, and Tina. They're walking through their village and they spot a farmer out tilling his land. He chats with them, explaining that he's growing wheat, adding manure to make the soil fertile, but the coolest thing he shares is the journey that his wheat is about to take. He tells them how his raw harvested grain is going to be sold in the local market, the mandi, and from there, it travels to factories to be completely transformed into the bread and biscuits they eat every single day. It's kind of a magical transformation when you really think about it. So let's dive into that transformation a bit deeper. Because that single grain of wheat perfectly illustrates the 3 major sectors of our entire global economy. Step 1 is the primary sector. This is all about the extraction and production of natural resources. Growing the wheat, that's a primary activity. Step 2 is secondary, which involves processing those resources. Taking that raw wheat and manufacturing it into baked bread or a packet of biscuits, that's secondary. And finally, step 3 is tertiary. These are the support services. The trucks hauling the wheat to the factory, the bank loans financing the farm, even the advertising for those biscuits, that's all tertiary. Agriculture sits proudly right at the very foundation in the primary sector. And the sheer, staggering scale of this primary activity, it's mind-blowing. 50%. Literally half of the entire global population is engaged directly in agricultural activity. Just let that sink in for a second. This is not some niche industry, it's the absolute cornerstone of human employment. And in certain regions, it's even more dominant. Take India, for example, where a full 2/3 of the population still depends directly on agriculture for their livelihood. To really wrap our heads around this foundational activity, it helps to look at the words themselves. The word agriculture actually comes directly from Latin. Ager or agri literally translates to soil, and culture means cultivation. So at its very core, long before we had tractors and GPS satellites, agriculture was simply the science and art of cultivating the soil to raise crops and rear livestock. It's just humans teaming up with the earth. But agriculture isn't the only culture out there. Let's do a rapid-fire rundown of some other totally fascinating types of cultivation. If you grow grapes, you are practicing viticulture. If you're growing vegetables, flowers, and fruits for commercial use, you're doing horticulture. What about the commercial rearing of silkworms? That is sericulture, and it's actually a great way farmers supplement their income. And if you're breeding fish in specially constructed tanks or ponds, that's pisciculture. The diversity going on in the primary sector is just incredible. Section 2. The farm system. Nature's factory. Now that we've got the roots down, we need to shift our perspective. We have to stop treating a farm as just a piece of land and start viewing it as a complex, highly functioning system. Basically, it's nature's factory. Just like any modern manufacturing plant, the farm system runs on a strict logical timeline. It flows from inputs to processes to outputs. You absolutely cannot get the outputs without carefully managing the inputs and processes. Farming operates on the exact same basic logic as a massive machine building cars or a computer processing data. Let's look at the very first step of that timeline, the inputs. This is where nature and human ingenuity totally collide. On one side, you have physical inputs from nature, sunshine, temperature, soil types, slope, and rainfall. But you also need critical human inputs. Heavy machinery, like a tractor, represents the mechanical side of things. Add to that your seeds, fertilizers, chemicals, and of course, human labor. You combine all of these inputs, you run them through processes like plowing, sowing, and irrigation, and finally, boom, you get your outputs: crops, wool, dairy, or poultry. Section 3. How the world farms, subsistence to commercial. So now that we understand the basic farm system, we need to see how it's adapted and scaled around the globe. Because actually, farms can't just be plopped down anywhere. They are strictly limited to what we call arable land. That's land where the topography of the soil and the climate are actually favorable for growing crops. Our entire global food supply is riding entirely on these specific pockets of the earth where the physical inputs align perfectly. Depending on those geographical conditions, along with demand and the available tech, farming generally splits into two main operating models. On one side, we have subsistence farming. This is traditionally low-tech, relies heavily on household labor, produces a pretty small output, and is really designed just to meet the immediate survival needs of the farmer's family. On the flip side, we have commercial farming. This is high capital, relies heavily on massive machinery over huge stretches of land, and literally everything is grown specifically for sale in the market. So it's basically family survival versus a massive market-driven business. Now, tucked within subsistence farming is this primitive method called shifting cultivation. You've probably heard it referred to as slash and burn agriculture. It involves clearing a forest plot by felling and burning the trees, mixing the ashes into the soil, growing crops until the soil's fertility dies out, and then just moving on. But what's absolutely fascinating is that this exact same method developed entirely independently across heavily forested, heavy rainfall areas all over the globe. It's called juming in northeast India, milpa in Mexico, roca in Brazil, and ladang in Malaysia. It's this universal human adaptation that just got uniquely named by different cultures. Section 4, crops that feed us, system outputs. The real takeaway here is that crops, they are incredibly picky. I mean, high maintenance. Rice, which is the staple diet for massive parts of the world, demands high heat, high humidity, and heavy rain. It thrives best in clay soil that can really hold on to water. Wheat is totally different. It wants moderate temperatures and rainfall while it's growing, but then it demands bright sunshine right at harvest time, and it prefers well-drained, loamy soil. And cotton? Oh, cotton is highly specific. It needs high temperatures, light rain, and exactly 210 frost-free days with bright sunshine to grow properly. No way around it. These strict natural requirements completely dictate our global supply chains and decide exactly where these crops can even be planted. Okay, before we move on from crops, I just have to share this absolutely brilliant historical anecdote about one of our most important beverage crops. Have you ever wondered who actually discovered coffee? Well, legend has it that back around 850 AD, an Arab goat herder named Khaldi noticed his flock acting incredibly hyper and energetic. So he goes over to investigate and sees them munching on berries from an evergreen bush. Curious, he tasted the berries himself, got that familiar caffeinated jolt we all know and love, and basically proclaimed his discovery to the world. It is wild to think that our modern morning routines trace all the way back to a curious goat herder. Section 5. The Future of Farming, Case Studies, and Security. To really grasp how this whole farm system is evolving to meet the demands of a growing population, we have to look at the massive contrasts out there. Take Moonilal's farm in India. It's a small 1.5 hectare plot. He rents a tractor, relies on his family for labor, gets advice from local elders, and sells his produce in the local mandi. It's intensive, small-scale farming. Now, compare that to Joe Horan's farm in the USA. It is a massive 300 hectares. Joe acts way more like a corporate CEO than a traditional farmer. His tractors are linked to satellites for precise field mapping. He sends his soil off to laboratories for scientific nutrient testing, uses fully automated grain storage, and manages an incredibly high-tech, high-capital commercial operation. But here's the thing. Despite those wild differences between Moonilal's family plot and Joe Horan's massive, tech-driven operation, they are both working toward the exact same ultimate aim of agricultural development: food security. Food security exists when all people, at all times, have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs for an active and healthy life. That is the grand, overriding purpose of the global farm machine. It all just comes right back to basic human survival and well-being. Which leaves us with a massive, lingering question. As our global population rapidly expands, totally squeezing the limits of our arable land, how will we continue to adopt these inputs, processes, and systems? How are we going to bridge the gap between those small subsistence plots and massive commercial operations to guarantee that ultimate goal of food security for the entire planet? It's a challenge that is absolutely going to define our future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and honestly, I hope you never look at a piece of bread or your morning cup of coffee the same way again.